Test one, two, three. And there has been a debate for almost a decade now about going or taking one of those preseason games and making it a regular season game. And the players aren't for it because it means that they're still getting paid 16 games for playing 17 games. So one of the things that they demanded or have been demanding for a decade now is that if you're going to pay us, then you need to pay us 1/16 more for the extra game we're going to play. The other thing is there's a great linebacker who's retired right now by the name of Ray Lewis. And Ray Lewis said, do you know what the injury report is in the NFL? It's 100%. And what he meant is that every player gets injured in a 16-game season. And the 17th game means one more game of playing full speed where you might get hurt. And anybody, if you want to talk in on this, Chad, or anybody out there, Jake, Paulie, Darby, the interesting thing about it is that I didn't ever think that would get resolved that way. There's only one reason why they're going to do a 17th game. There's only one reason. Anybody want to guess?
Money.
Money, exactly. Money is honey, as they say. And I think that there's no doubt about it. And especially if you look at I think the number was something like $2.6 billion the NFL lost last year. And I think there's the general insistence from both the advertisers and from the networks that if they're going to be paying out this amount of money, they want an extra game this year so they can make money. Comes down to that. So I'm not surprised. Good evening, everyone online. Hope you all are doing good. Before we start, I would like, so has anyone been interested in the Suez Canal thing like I have? It's been kind of interesting. So, a little bit of my personal experience. I used to work on a tugboat on the Mississippi River. My dad was a captain and he was a river pilot. And I'll show you a picture of my dad in a minute here. And so I've always been kind of fascinated with ships. And this is one of those things that's really unique that I wanted to talk over because I want you to think of marketing channels and supply chain and think of what this has done and the disruption. And I also want you out there to think of this in terms of a marketing strategy as well, because 6 months ago, I told my channels class that we're going to see some. I also told my marketing strategy class is that we're going to see the effects of some of the things that were being planted here. So does anybody know what a container ship is or get an idea of what they are or what they do? Okay, great. This is going to be good for you because this is important stuff. This is really important stuff for you to understand. So without further ado, I call this the Ever Given Night. It was the name of the ship is the Ever Given. And so if there ain't an ever given nightmare, this is definitely it. So shipping from time immemorial until about 1930, the way that you loaded a shipping vessel was pretty much the same way, all right? You would take things of unlike sizes, you would put them in cargo nets, you would ship them on pallets. All of this was very difficult to do. It took a lot of time. It took a specialized class of stevedores to be able to load ships in a proper way. Around 1930, I wish I could remember his name. McNeil Corporation was I guess his name was McNeil then. In the 1930s, this gentleman who was a shipper in the Great Lakes thought that there has to be a better way of doing this, and why am I taking goods out of a railroad boxcar and putting them in a ship, and when they get off the ship, they go put them in another railroad boxcar. And so he came up with this idea that perhaps instead of taking the goods out of the boxcar, maybe we should just wheel the whole boxcar right on the ship. And these were what were known as, oh gosh, sea land, okay? They were known as sea land, and they were also called sea trains, okay? And so the way that they worked, and this was in the 30s when they just started doing this, is they were called roll-os, roll on and roll off. They'd take the train, they would back up the train and put the boxcars on the ship. The ship had rails. They'd lock the boxcar rails down, and they'd take the whole ship. It would go overseas. They'd lock it down again. They'd put it back on rails and roll it right off. It was a great idea, however, okay? One of the difficulties is that the rail standards in the United States are different from the rail standards in other countries too. If any of you have traveled in Europe, you'll know that the gauge or the distance between the wheels is significantly different in Europe than it is in the United States. The United States has a much broader wheel structure. When my father-in-law came and my wife, we all went to Concord, North Carolina. I don't know if you've ever been that way, but they have a railroad transportation museum there, and they were stunned at how big our locomotives were. They just rolled them away. I mean, everything else next to American locomotives looked like Thomas the Tank Engine. I mean, they couldn't believe it. Well, this is one of the problems that they had, but it still was a good idea. And so what you found is after the 40s, after World War II, the idea came and it was created what were called lash ships, light, fast moving container ships. And the whole concept of the container ship came then, and this is where we are now. So I'm going to explain to you what a container ship is, okay? So if you look on the left, that picture, that's an actual container ship, and look at all of those containers on it. And so a container ship is a cargo ship, and what it carries is what are known as intermodal containers. And it's exactly what it sounds like. The mode that you change them, you could take one of these containers, you could put it on a truck bed. You could take the container and put it on a rail car. And so the way that you measure the container ship capacity is what's known as a TEU, a 20-foot equivalent unit. And so if you ever get into your supply chain classes or whatever, you're going to look at this concept of what a TEU is, and that's exactly a picture of it in the bottom right there, okay? So it means 20-foot equivalent unit. It's based on the volume of a 20-foot long intermodal container, which is a standardized metal box. Now, modern TEUs are actually 40 feet long, so they're called 2 TEUs, okay? So look at all of those containers on there. A modern container ship, the largest one, can contain 23,000 of those. So just think of everything inside there, okay? You don't measure it by weight, you measure it by mass, for the lack of a better word, okay? And so those are Maersk container ships. You can see how gigantic they are. It's amazing to look at. Now, if you ever want to go close and go see what a container terminal looks like, you don't have to go any further than Savannah, Georgia. I went there 5 years ago for a conference, and I was just blown away. I mean, I've seen the elevators in New Orleans, but this was like nothing I had ever seen. The Savannah, Georgia has the largest container port on the eastern seaboard. 4.6 million of those containers in 2020, and it was an off year. Now, look over here. Those are all of the ones that are just sitting around, okay? And they're building rail transportation so that these can be shipped to Memphis, and to Georgia, oh, excuse me, into Chicago. And the interesting thing is there's kind of an East Coast, West Coast rivalry. So the West Coast has the big container port in Long Beach, California. And this is the big East Coast one. And so there's kind of like a race towards the middle. I'll never forget the first time I was in Savannah and I was just looking out my window going, holy cow. By the way, I worked on one of those. That's what I did. I worked on a tug. And what you've got to do is you got to be able to pull that beast out. Now, modern ships have what's called port and stern thrusters, and so they're like propellers that are on the side that will move the ship this way, and then the back stern thrusters that move it that way, and that kind of gives it some kind of mobility. So that's 4.6 million of those boxes. So now I'm going to kind of give you an idea of where ships were. The Panama Canal has been around, of course, it was finished in 1916, I think. And the Panama Canal basically limited the transportation between the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And a ship that would fit inside of the Panama Canal was known as a Panamax vessel, okay? And so if it was called Panamax, you knew it would fit inside the Panama Canal. Now they've expanded the Panama Canal since 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And so now you have what are called the new Panamax, Neo-Panamax vessels. They're much bigger, all right? But until then, look, a Panamax vessel, which is around 700 feet long, maximum capacity is about 5,000 of those containers. The biggest of the class, the ultra-large containers, are 14,500 or 20,000, and one vessel, one ultra-large one, has the capacity of 4 or 5 of the Panamax. So it kind of gives you an idea, all right? So getting that all into mind, we started, hold on. Excuse me, folks, be right back. This is my wife, Dr. Robinson.
Hello,
This is my MBA class.
I teach at 8 a.m. tomorrow, so we'll see if I can get in before my class starts.
She's loved by her class, 8 a.m. Okay, so this is the ship, or this is the vessel that got stuck, the Ever Given. And so it's the Golden class container. It is 220,940 gross metric tons. That's not pounds, that's tons, okay? The dead weight tons, 199, is when the vessel is not equipped at all, no oil, no gas, no nothing. Its length is 400 meters or 1,312 feet. Draft on it, the depth is 32.9 meters, so it's got 100 feet to the bottom. Now, if you're a marketing person in your marketing strategies, this is one of the things that you want to do is you want to start breaking down the numbers and start making questions, okay? So the propulsion is a single shaft fixed propeller. It's, of course, more than sufficiently powered, but this is me as an individual who's worked on vessels before. It has only 2 bow thrusters. Remember, so I talked about those things that can move it. They only have them at the front and they don't have them at the back. And my first initial thought is that you've just limited your mobility by 50% by not having stern thrusters on. Speed is 23. A knot, by the way, is the only true speed measuring system in the world. A knot is basically a relationship to a distance based upon the circumference of the Earth. And so in other words, when you talk about knots, you're talking about a true distance moving from one location on the planet to another. Miles per hour, kilometers per hour can always get mixed up because of speed or wind, okay? Wind resistance and those kind of things. So you can never get a true indication of speed. Knots are true, okay? That's about 25 miles an hour. So think of that thing moving 25 miles an hour, okay? And then with all of that, the capacity of 20,000 of those boxes with a crew of only 25, okay? So it gets stuck, all right? And so these are three of the pictures of it. There's the, from the ground level, just look at that thing, okay? It stands 130 meters tall, all right? Just to give you an idea from the water level. There it is above, all right? And then this is the Maersk vessel. Now, here's the thing about it. It's a lucky thing that thing stopped, because vessels that big, an oil vessel, the super ones, the biggest ones that are that long, 1,300 feet long, when you throw those things in full reverse, it takes 7 miles to stop a vessel like that, okay? So the fact that it stopped was amazing. So what happened? So this is what it looked like, and this kind of gives you what happened with it. And so it's plowed over here, and so what happened was, it was going up the Suez Canal, going from south to north, and you have two effects happening there. You have what's called the bow effect and the stern effect. So on a vessel this large, a bow effect actually creates like a positive pole, a resistance that pushes it away from the bank, all right? The stern effect, because you also have the propulsion in the back, what's happening is the vessel, the rear end is trying to move towards the bank. And so you've got these two forces going on. You got the bow being pushed away from the bank, and you got the stern that's going towards the bank. And what happened is as I was coming up the river, it tried to move to the port side, and then it moved to the starboard side, and that's when it crashed, and that's where we are right now. So this is in a narrow section of the Suez Canal. Now think of this, the ship is 1,300 feet long, and in this section where it's only single passage, it's 900 feet long. So the ship is actually wider than the actual Suez Canal at this point. So I wanted to talk to somebody about this, and I wanted to talk to someone with experience. Let's see. Did I have a chat? I did. Hello, everybody. Hello. Can everyone hear me now? One new message. Can you hear me? Okay, is there anyone who can? I'm sorry, I should have checked. Okay, I'm assuming everyone can hear me. Okay. So, I wanted to check with someone that I could really talk about this to be able to get an idea of what's going on. And so, as I said before, the person that I really know that knows this stuff better than anyone else is my dad. Okay, thanks, Nick. So I talked to my dad. So this is my dad right here. Captain Harvey Shells, right there. Dad came up the long way. He started when he was 15 years old as a deckhand, worked his way up, was a third mate in the 50s, became a captain in the 60s, and then finally became a pilot on the Mississippi River, and worked there for 20 years, worked in Tampa Bay Harbor for 5. So I always like to say I have a terminal degree, but my dad had a terminal degree before I did. When you get a merchant marine card, the merchant marine card shows limitations, all right? And so we would say like captain, maximum 100-ton vessel, limited to the Gulf of Mexico and the Chapalaya waterways. That would be an example. My dad's Z card says ship's master, unlimited tonnage, unlimited waters. So I always say my dad had a terminal degree before I did. The number of unlimited masters is actually about the same number of PhDs there are in the world. So it is kind of true. Yeah, I like that picture of Dad. Now this is the classic, captain's kind of look. So there he is with his walkie-talkie that's communicating both down below ship and then also with the harbor. He's smoking a cigar there. He's on the sail of a submarine. He's bringing this one into port in New Orleans. He's sporting his glasses and his mustache. I mean, it's just badass. I just love that picture of Dad. He always laughs at me. He said, "Don't you like me better without a mustache?" I said, "Nah, Dad, you look like a ship's man that way." So anyway, I'm going on. I'm proud of Dad. So I talked to Dad about this, and I wanted to find out first what he thought. And he said right away, it's the captain's fault, all right? And I said, "Why do you say it's the captain's fault, Dad?" And he said, I hear Dad repeat this over and over again. The captain is responsible for the lives of his crew and the safety and health of his vessel that they serve. He says that over and over again, and he believes that with all of his heart. And so I started collecting information on it. And so this is what had happened. There was a 40-mile-an-hour crosswind moving from west to east. There was also a desert storm or a Scirocco that had created and limited visibility. The Ever Given was going 13 knots. That's fast. Now, I was told, or I'd heard, that the Suez Canal, authority was telling him to go 13 knots, but as a captain, he has the right to demand tugboats. And so he should have been able to have a tugboat on each one, on the bow. You could have 40, you could have 20 tugboats if you wanted to. And so one of Dad's other famous sayings is that a captain's worst problem, the worst problems captains get in is getting in a hurry. He says that all the time. Dad was very patient when he was when he shipped. He can't stand these YouTubes of watching ships captains taking these vessels and spinning them around, 500-foot vessels. He just thinks that's so irresponsible of a captain to do that. Once again, the captain's in charge of the ship. And yeah, there was. Now, here comes the things that in marketing strategy, these are the two things I saw 6 months ago. And I want you as marketing strategists to kind of think of this, okay? So the first two things that exacerbated the problem, the first one was I noticed this in September. This was in the Wall Street Journal. What shipping companies were doing during the pandemic is that they were not tying up their vessels. If you tie up a vessel, you have to pay docking fees. You have to supply power to it. You have to be able to put personnel on it to keep away theft, to keep away pests, to stop it from rotting. There's a lot of things that can happen bad when you just park a vessel. And what a lot of these shipping companies were doing was they were just taking and selling them for cash, and they were scrapping them. So we've actually reduced the number of vessels that are out there. Now, it's important to understand, they're not chopping up the big ones, they're chopping up the Panaflex ones. So if you look at those are smaller by size, 700 footers, okay? You can actually look up this Wall Street Journal article. And they were hoping that after the pandemic was over that they could build fast enough. It's such a pipe dream that they could build fast enough to get their number of vessels back up. Now, what happens when you have fewer small vessels? Does anybody want to throw out there a possibility? What do you do if you have fewer small vessels? you use the big ones, okay? So think about it, the traffic went from from more smaller vessels to more big vessels. So guess what happens now? You got a lot of big vessels that are out there on the oceans now, with fewer smaller ones. And the smaller ones also, you don't have as much flexibility as you did before. And so these could be parked almost anywhere. Now you're limiting yourself to the number of ports that you can actually put these vessels in. So that's the first thing you've done, is you've limited your flexibility in shipping, all right? So that's the first thing. I started noticing this as well at about the same time. What was happening also is that they were getting rid of crews, but they were keeping the crews that were on the larger vessels, they were keeping them on. By law, as a merchant marine, you are supposed to be given 2 months out of every year off. Now, it seems like a lot of time off, but the truth is that if you're on a vessel, you're there 24 hours a day. And generally what you have is you have 3 cruise shifts, 4 hours each. So that means you work 12 hours a day. Now, 12 hours a day is a lot of time. Not only that, now you're on the same vessel, you're not being paid room and board, you're being fed, all of those things, but you develop what's known as channel fever, okay? Channel fever is the same as cabin fever up here, all right? So it's having to be inside all the time. Well, just think of the same thing of being inside for a year. What was happening were ports in Europe and everywhere else where they were going, they were basically closed due to the pandemic. So it means that crews couldn't get off the ships. And I worked on vessels. I mean, I worked on a vessel. I didn't get off a vessel for 6 weeks. And I got a little buggy after a while. I can't imagine what it must be like for a year. So I started seeing these articles, ships, crews fight exhaustion and despair, puts lives and trade at risk, stranded at sea, 400,000 seafarers stuck on cargo ships all over the world. This was started in, okay, that was December 7th. That article in the New York Times was here in October. And let's see, that was September, this one here. So you get an idea of where the timing is on this. And then I saw this, I was looking at a trade journal for the International Maritime Organization. And this is the quote, this is Kat Lim, and he is the, how would I say it? He's kind of like the chair of this organization. Seafarers cannot remain at sea indefinitely. In addition to the humanitarian crisis that has been caused by keeping seafarers trapped on their vessels, the safety issues that arise from requiring overly fatigued and mentally exhausted seafarers to continue operating vessels are a matter of great concern. And so what you had was a combination of a limited number of vessels. You had overworked and exhausted crews, and this basically builds up to a time bomb. Now, I will say this, as far as now, thank God there was not an environmental disaster and that there has been no lives lost. However, it has cost $800 million a day in lost revenues from those ships. There are over 400 ships at either end now that have to try to find a way to get through the Suez, and that doesn't include the other ones that are still backed up that are waiting to go through the Suez. They're talking this might take a couple of months to finally wind itself out. So all that money they were saving by cutting up ships, they could have bought 500 ships. Okay, so what all of this means is that the need to rely on larger vessels versus the smaller Panamax vessels. This is what happened, all right? You have overworked crews, which have too much sea time, they need relief. The mistake by the captain was they were moving too fast into conditions that reduced the number of options. If anyone has read about Kobe Bryant's disaster in the helicopter, this is almost, in its way, it's very much the same conditions. The helicopter pilot flew into conditions that he didn't have an exit strategy for. It's called go fever. It's also getting their itis. It has many names. Ultimately, what it meant is you had limited solutions into an overcrowded environment, and he didn't have a way out. And so the last is kind of my dad's point. And this has to do with a lack of seamanship. And you find this on merchant vessels, and you find this on airplanes, and basically the art of piloting, whether it's a plane or whether it's a ship, has kind of given way to the technology, and technology is a beautiful thing. However, the hours that it takes to understand vessels is not what it used to be. My dad was one of those people who enjoyed learning. I can never forget this, is in the 60s. He was watching something, and this Cajun captain just rolled in his tugboat and walked it in sideways to a dock. And Dad looked at, and Dad's a master, unlimited time. He sat and talked to that captain. I was waiting to take him home. He sat and talked to him for an hour, asking him how to do that. And that's seamanship, that's interested in your craft. And the difficulty is, and this is the danger of technology, is that we forget our ability to put the human experience into what we do. If you listen to Air France's disaster, this was in 2008, where Airbus jet lost control and plunged into the sea in the Atlantic Ocean. What happened was one of the measuring devices for the automatic pilot froze up, and the automatic pilot went out, and they couldn't gain control of the plane until it was too late. And so that's kind of the thing that happens. In the last decade, I don't know if you've heard this, but there have been Navy ships that have collided with each other, in the middle of bays, and sailors have been lost. And this comes down to this lack of seamanship, not enough hours at the wheel. And so I'm kind of telling you this kind of as a cautionary tale, is that we can't lose those things that give us control. And so even when we're talking about autonomous vehicles and all of the other things that we have to make our lives easier, we can't forget to practice the skills that make us exceptional, okay? And so that's kind of my speech on this. Is there anybody who wants to talk about it or say anything about it? Any questions out there? Okay, that's cool. All right, I just thought I'd like to pass that on. Folks, if you get into international shipping, it's a good thing to know this kind of stuff. It really is. If you can tell them what those measuring sticks mean, and by the way, folks, personally to me, I think international shipping is a great future, especially you young people right now. I think we have not even touched the surface of shipping and that kind of thing, and travel and channels and strategy and all. We've barely scratched the surface, and I just think there's going to be a lot of fascinating things coming down the road. Okay, so thank you. Let's go on. I just wanted to pass that along to you. I might include that maybe in a bonus question or two. So let us go back, and we're going to start on chapter 13, I think. I'm all over the map. Yep, 13. Oh, by the way, folks, I will finish your grading tomorrow afternoon, okay? I appreciate your patience. Okay, tabs together, gotcha. These, by the way, are recordings that I already did on chapter 13. I'm doing a recording of this one. It's the same thing. You can use it. At first I thought about, should I take it? I went, nah, it's interesting stuff. Okay, so. There it is. Couldn't find it. I look forever trying to stop having to, or being able to make it smaller. And then I use the internet, how silly, to be able to find the one little option I've been looking for all along. Okay. So the last chapters that we're going to deal with, finally getting around to the 4 Ps and setting product strategy. So the important thing to recognize right off the bat when we're talking about product strategy is we're going to talk about the basics of it, but we're going to talk about its connection and uses in strategic ways. And so the first thing right off the top of that we're going to do is talk about what is a product. And so a product is basically anything, all right? We used to find classifications of goods that limited it in certain ways, but anything that can be offered to the market to satisfy a need or want is a product. And that includes physical goods, it includes services, it also includes experiences and events. In 1999, there was a book written by Pine and Gilmore through the Wall Street Journal Press that was, Harvard Press, that was called The Experience Economy. And what Pine and Gilmore said basically is that we're not necessarily marketing goods or products or services, but we're marketing in essence the experiences, the totality of everything that we're doing. And so, yes, can we market experiences? We're talking about the football season opening. And so that's an example of marketing an experience. I mean, what is the product other than we're creating this experience for consumers to enjoy? And so this is what a product is. Now, it's important also to realize is that planning begins with formulating all of those particular items in the offering that customers want or need, okay? And so if you're kind of looking what all of these, the mix is, this goes back to something that's originally comes into, that comes from industrial marketing, where it talks about how all of these things mix together. And so it is not only the physical parts of the product, okay? It is also the services that are part of the mix of that individual product as well. And then yes, the price, the value-based price is part of that too. Now, what we're going to do is only consider the product in and of itself in this particular class. We're not going to talk about price, but certainly the value of a good is directly connected to the price that you sell. And when we start talking about price, I'll show you where when price goes up, demand goes up too. So how do we define what a product is? Well, a product is defined by 5 product levels, okay? And so the first thing in the middle there, if you look at it, there's something that says the core benefit. And what this is the service or the benefit that the customer is really buying. If I'm going to a hotel, what I am buying is a comfortable place to sleep. That would be an example of a core benefit. One of the things that Theodore Levitt also spoke about quite often is the fact that you must sell the benefits. And so, true to his word on that, this is where you have the classic discussion by Theodore Levitt, is that when you sell a 1/4-inch drill, the consumer is not wanting a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole, okay? And so this is an example of when you're buying a product and how you drive the message by using the benefits. And so Greek yogurt is nutritious. What does that mean? It makes you healthier and more satisfied. You sell on those benefits. This medicine has 500 milligrams of acetaminophen. One dose of this medicine will relieve your headache. The phone case is made of layers of carbon fibers and reinforced plastic. With this case, your phone should survive any fall. Selling the benefits, the core benefits, are usually where you focus as a marketer when it comes to deciding or discussing your product. And so they might want 1/4-inch holes, but they better buy the better. So this is their point. We're saying, yeah, you want a 1/4-inch hole, but what you really want to do is tell them that they get better holes with this better 1/4-inch drill. So it's kind of a way also to talk about, yes, it's important to sell on the benefits, but you have to understand the features about that particular drill that make it desirable. So the argument chases itself like the tail chasing a dog. So the core benefit is basically the benefits the customer is really buying. The basic product is the physical characteristics about whatever you're saying. And that could also be service as well. So we're talking about a hotel room, we're talking about a bed, we're talking about a bathroom, towels. Now, of course, you've got to have internet access. Usually you're also going to have some kind of charging connection as well. At the third level, the expected product are those attributes and conditions that you expect when you purchase the product. And so not just a bed, but a clean bed, fresh towels, unlimited hot water, and hopefully a degree of quiet. And so that's the expected product. The augmented product is where those things exceed customer expectations. The difficulty with augmented products is that they rapidly become expected. I remember when I was starting the internet service provider, this was 2002, and a hotel that was near where I was wanted me to set up internet access for them, and I did. And they asked me how long did I think they could go on with this benefit. And I said, probably about 3 to 6 months. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, they won't want to pay extra for it. It'll become something they expect as a standard. And that's generally true. You know, most expected product usually start out as an augmented kind of thing. So, you know, that's an expectation. You can also say that these are all of the advantages that a brand brings as well, okay? So a brand positioning is one of these things that you might expect here. So Holiday Inn in the 70s was basically the same Holiday Inn over 3,000 buildings, okay? So there were like 3,000 motels across the United States, and every Holiday Inn from Florida to Washington State, they were all the same. And the Holiday Inn saying was, the best surprise is no surprise. So if you knew that if you turned towards the right in a Holiday Inn in Georgia and the swimming pool was there, you could go to a Holiday Inn in California and you turn to the right and the swimming pool was there. They've changed that because consumers want more than that. The last is the potential product, is ultimately where those augmentations might undergo in the future. And so these are the ways that there's the expectation that we need to satisfy consumers further on. You already start seeing this in hotels now, because you can see now things like, you know, and you'll see this in ingredient branding that are pillows, you know, high thread count bed sheets. Those kind of things have already moved off the drawing board to the augmented, and ultimately you're going to be in the expected. Okay, so from there, how do you define or classify your products? It basically comes down to three things: the durability, how durable the product is; its tangibility, whether it is a product or a service, tangible or intangible; and its use. Use is whether or not it's a consumer good or whether it's an industrial good. Now, how do you determine whether a good is a consumer good versus an industrial good? The determination of whether it is or not all comes down to the buying motive. If I go to Staples and I buy a laptop, and the laptop is going to be used for my daughter to do her schoolwork, then it's a consumer good. If I go to Staples, buy that same laptop, and I'm going to use that for consulting services, then that would be considered an industrial or a commercial good. It's all about the buying motive. So when we're talking about durability and tangibility, we break that further down into what's known as a non-durable and a durable good and a service. So a non-durable good is a good that is usually consumed in one or more sessions or uses. Usually these goods, because they're consumed quickly, generally these goods are also considered convenience goods, and your appropriate strategy is to put them in convenience stores. But this is where I beg to differ with Kotler, because I can think of non-durable goods that are specialty items. Paul Mitchell shampoo is an example, okay? I spend the $12 and I buy Paul Mitchell. I do, because I just think it's better, okay? And I'm worth it. So anyway, non-durable good, all right? And so sometimes it works that way, sometimes it doesn't, but a non-durable good can certainly be a shopping item, no doubt about it. A durable good is generally any good that survives many uses. Refrigerator, machine tools, clothing. Usually these goods are more complex. As a marketer, a durable good generally requires more personal selling. I said complexity, right? The goods tend to be more, durable goods tend to be more complex. They have more features. And these features have to be greater explained so that they can be understood as benefits. Services are intangible, variable, inseparable. In other words, you basically take the service and it's all one item. And it is perishable. In other words, you can't stock a service on the shelf. It is usually consumed at the moment of purchase. because of the variability in services, individual customer loyalty and brand loyalty is more important than ever. I'm sure every one of you knows of a hairstylist who never cut your hair better, and you only wanted that one individual to touch your hair. That's an example. There's the services generally success is tied more to an individual or to a brand, because quite simply, there's no way to be able to take out variability in a service, okay? Now, you can do things such as create minimum standards, such as being able to cut your hair in a certain way. Jay Sebring in the 60s and 70s used to have what was called the Sebring cut. And so that was one way of doing it. And of course, you have places, Great Clips and the others that do the same thing. And what their point is to create certain high minimum standards that are usually met. Okay, durability and tangibility. So the real categorization of goods really started in 1923, and I'm trying to remember who did it. It might have been McCracken. Anyway, the first real start of marketing came from economics. And marketing was branched off of economics when it was determined quite simply that you couldn't treat every good in the same way. And what we found is that consumer goods tended to gravitate towards certain categories, and so we came up with the consumer goods classifications. Now, the first three, as I said, were developed in 1923. The last one was developed in 1976, when they found that there was a classification which did not fit in the other three. Consumer goods are usually bought immediately, frequently, and with little effort. Immediately, frequently, and with little effort. It means that peripheral keys, such as colors, shapes, and sizes, are more important than the ingredients that are branded on the item itself. Convenience goods are broken down in another way as well. There are those goods that you buy every week or every day almost, and those are what are known as staples. Bread, milk, eggs. Those are goods that are purchased bi-weekly, sometimes every day. And so staples are different from convenience goods, in which we simply want to buy them at the closest place possible, such as candy and Coke, and that there's very little variability in the product itself, no matter where it's located. Now, in a supermarket, this is entirely different because you have greater variety. And then finally, emergency goods fall under the category of convenience because they are purchased at a moment's notice and with minimal effort. And so I think I've said this before. I was driving through Mississippi 2 months ago, and it was a torrential downpour, and I pulled into a convenience store, and of all things, they had umbrellas. I couldn't believe it. And I went, there's a marketing thing for you. Somebody's smart. So those are convenience goods. Shopping goods are those goods that require you to compare and contrast things, such as style, quality. And these are goods in which you are encouraged to look at more than one item at a time. And that if you had just a single line, that in many places the shopping stores could not survive. And so the category killer stores, such as Best Buy, those exist and they need to have as many brands as they possibly can because the variety attracts individuals. By the very same token, Walmart is the same way. Although they don't have the depth or the product width as others, they have a little bit of everything. And of course, Amazon stretched the whole margin out by being 1,000 yards wide and 1 inch deep. And so they would have thousands of different items in a given product category, but they might have 1 or 2 of each. The specialty item are those items that are so unique that you will seek them out. You will make a special effort to purchase them. And not only that, but there is the expectation of a higher price and the satisfaction to pay it. As a matter of fact, if you were to find a lower price, you would be concerned. So if you found a Rolex watch, somebody was selling it outside of some place in New York for 50 bucks, what's your first thought?
So,
Yeah. It's funny, my professor, the chair of my department, Dr. Babin, he was the chair of my dissertation committee. He has a friend of his who collects fake Rolexes. And believe it or not, there is a market for fake Rolexes. And you would not believe the money that is invested in a fake Rolex, okay? But that's such as the power of a Rolex. It demands a pretty good fake, okay? So it can't be just any fake, it's gotta be a good fake, whatever that means. And the last is an unsought good. And as I talked about, this was developed in 1976, and these are services that are unsought. So cemetery plots, insurance. True story, my mother, after Katrina, her apartment was destroyed. And she told me, with the money that she got, she said, honey, I bought a cemetery plot in Long Beach for me. So I have somewhere. And I went, well, that's good, Mom. And she said, oh, and I bought one for you, and I bought one for your brother Lynn, and I bought one for your sister Jewel. And I was about to say something, and I thought, you know what? That provided her with great comfort. That I have a place to go. What am I going to say? I said, thanks, Mom. I've always wanted a cemetery plot. So, no, I didn't say that. And I might still go there. My wife is going to cremate. I might just do something else. Who knows? So, anyway, all of these things together, putting together all of these goods in such a way that they make them unique, that creates an ambiance, something that's special, is what's called a design. A design is the totality of those features that affect the way that a product looks, feels, and functions to a consumer. And so I bought a Toyota Highlander 2017 2 weeks ago. I spent 2 months going over things. I was in Car Guru, I was in Cars.com. And this is the way I do things. I obsess over the pieces that I'm looking for. And then I make sure that if I miss a deal, I don't get upset because there's another deal coming along the way. And I found one, and it was everything I wanted. And it was kind of unique because it was registered in Virginia and Iowa and Hawaii. And it was in Elizabethton, Kentucky. So I pulled out my map and I found that everywhere within 15 miles of it, there was a major military base. And Elizabethton, Kentucky is 10 miles away from Fort Knox. Anyway, it's an XLE. It has all of the features that I want. And one of the design features I didn't notice, but I noticed the other day, is the doors are heavy. And I didn't really think about it until I delved in a little deeper. And that's, they have stainless steel door panels in that, and it makes it safe. The hinges are made of 1/4-inch steel. I mean, the car is built to last. And that's all part of the design, the Toyota design, that puts all of those things together. And so what makes designs so special? Well, they're powerful emotionally. To look at them transmits the brand meaning and the positioning. For those of you who, if I were to say a Ford Mustang, mentally, if you knew what one was, you've got a picture in your head right now. Because it has that appeal to it. Design is extremely important in durable goods because it takes it past the basic minimums and elevates it to a whole different level. And yes, it makes the experience rewarding. And for any one of you who is and swears by Apple, I don't have to say anymore. The Apple is everything to you. Design also is something that is a holistic approach that also permeates through manufacturing and into distribution as well. And so an example of this is, I think I've talked about this before, is the Lexus. And so when the Lexus came out in the first 3 years, I don't know if they still do this now, but they gave free oil changes away for the first 12 months to 36,000, every 3,000 miles, whether it was synthetic or regular oil, you could get an oil change. And the reason why was it's part of this overall design. It transmits in this brand identity with everything. And if I say Lexus, you've got that idea in your head. If I were to say Cadillac, I would say the same things. There's multiple approaches that design can do, but ultimately what it does is it functions as a way of transmitting the meaning of a brand to the consumer. It is the totality of everything. And as I said before, one of those things in the Toyota was that solid door. You just knew it. And it has other things that are built into it. It has Entune in, it doesn't have Android, and it doesn't have iPhone, iOS built into it. And I thought initially that that was a weakness, but then again, I thought of it again, it's not hackable, all right? They run their own operating system, and so it's built in such a way that it can't be intruded on where other brands could. Okay, I'm going on. I'll be talking about my car all night. So luxury brands used to be only what were considered a social status. They used to create this illusion of wealth. What a luxury brand is, if I were going to give it a statement, is that it isn't in fashion, but it never goes out of fashion. That is what a luxury brand is. And if I were to say luxury brand and I were trying to put together 3 things, I would take those 3 things in the middle there: craftsmanship, heritage, and authenticity. And so if I were to look at that agave tequila, that's a great example. And of course, quality is in there. And of course, quality is that it satisfies every single expectation that you have. And I shouldn't take out history about anything as well. every luxury brand has a story. And many times that story is hundreds of years old. And even if a luxury brand is new, like a Lexus, it has a history and a story as well. And it was the desire by Toyota to be able to transmit their factors such as safety and durability into a luxury vehicle. You might even say that the luxury brands are the purest example of branding. Everything is about the brand. Paul Mitchell can charge 3 times what you would pay for a normal shampoo and conditioner. But the truth is, it's the best. And the brand works for me. So luxury brands. So, when it comes to products, how do we go about creating lines and brands, okay? So one of the things that when you initially create a line, what you'll do is after a while is you tend to lengthen the line or the unique items that are within that particular brand. And so what you'll find is that manufacturing pressures generally will create this need to be able to have it used 24 hours a day. And so what you'll find is that instead of doing one item, you'll find them doing more. So let's see if one of these things will write tonight. 2 down, 3 down. We'll do the last one probably. 4 down, may not be any of them. All right, I'll just use this. So anyway, Toyota, surprise, surprise, if I were to ask you the number of items that Toyota makes, you might think maybe 4 or 5. It makes the Rave, makes the Highlander, it makes the Corolla. I don't even know if some of the brands exist anymore. But the truth is that Toyota makes 30 different models. And this variability basically is their way of being able to fulfill every possible idea or permutation that consumers would want. And so what you do, or what Toyota found is that in order to be able to complete itself, Toyota did what was called an upmarket stretch and then a downmarket stretch. Now, one of the difficult things is that when you're building new items, there's always the possibility that you can erode the brand value of your item if that item isn't successful. All right. And so what Toyota was concerned with is that if they were going to come up with a luxury model, that they were afraid that the regular Toyota line would suffer if that particular item had a failure. And one of the ways that you can do this, and this will be important for you when you might want to consider things in your case studies, is they wanted to be able to create a product, but they didn't want to be able to erode the brand. And so what they had to do was they had to come up with a new brand. And so Toyota, in going upmarket stretch, created, as I've said before, Lexus, okay? A Lexus is Toyota, through and through. One of the amazing thing and unique things is Toyota's obsession, and a good one, an obsession of making sure that parts are interchangeable. This is another thing about Toyota's commitment to consumers. They want to make sure that parts are plentiful enough so that if things do go wrong, that consumers don't have to go very far to look for those items. I think I've said this before, in Ford, when Alan Mulally took over Ford in 2005, there were 35 different models that that Ford had, and it had 29 different radiators. Toyota, in all of the 30 models they have one radiator. And this is one of the things that is to their advantage. And so they created the Lexus that was essentially a Toyota, but as I said before, they added the service, the 3-year, 36,000 mile guarantee. Now, they also wanted to do a down market stretch and create a brand, once again with the Toyota quality, but not with the Toyota brand, especially in a downward stretch, which it would be considered a lower end kind of vehicle, perhaps not with all of the things that in Toyota, perhaps not using automatic windows, maybe roll down windows. And they created a brand. Anybody remember what the name of it was? Scion. Okay. Scion was a Toyota brand. Scion was relatively successful, but Toyota decided that in terms of the overall dollars profit that they got out of it, it was limited to the point of not really giving them what they wanted, okay? And so they wanted to produce a lower price line. They were successful at it, but however, Hyundai and Kia were doing that as well, and they felt like they weren't getting anything out of it, okay? And so in essence, what Toyota did was they did an upmarket stretch and a down market stretch. And when you do both of those together, it's called a two-way stretch, okay? Now, one of the ways also that you can extend the lifetime of a product is then when you add more individual items in the line itself. And so going back to my Highlander, the Highlander has the LE, the LE Plus, and the XLE, and now they have what's called the LE Premium. And that's an example of line filling. They added more models. What Toyota did is they found that consumers, once again, listening to your consumers, is that consumers blocked in certain options and that you could actually draw a line and say, these consumers wanted these options and they didn't want any of these over here. This group wanted these options, but they didn't want anything else. And so they created the LE, the LE Premium, and the XLE. I got the XLE, okay? And the line filling helps because it extends the lifetime of that particular product and it adds more options for consumers as well, all right? You also find that regular modernization of the lines is helpful as well. And this is when, not necessarily planned obsolescence, but this is when you find items in which the items just basically improve over and over again. Like the 2017 one I have has an 8-speed automatic transmission where the 2017 has a 6. I'm just talking too much, I know. But modernization is important. But the last thing I also want to say as well is that it's important to prune lines as well. And what that line pruning means is eventually you have to find out and review all of those models you have and take out the models that are no longer a profit. And that's what they did ultimately with the Scion. Now, finally, when we talk about putting together brands, what you do find is that many times you will try to combine brands together in some fashion and hopefully in a way that makes sense. And so what you can find is that companies like General Mills, they advertise Trick cereal and Yoplait yogurt all in the same, in essence, same group. Now, what you joint venturing is when you have two corporations that are different and unique together, and they come together to brand something. So General Electric and Hitachi, believe it or not, came together and created light bulbs together. In 1988 to 1992, General Motors and Toyota created a factory in California and built the Toyota Corolla and the Chevrolet Nova out of the same factory plant. They were bolt for bolt the exact same cars. And guess which one sold more? Want to guess?
Toyota.
Yeah, it did. And the Corolla sold for $1,500 more. And it was bolt for bolt the same car. But that just shows you, okay? You'll find also that you'll get together and there'll be multiple sponsors that will join together. So an example of this is when Apple, IBM, and Motorola came together and was building a central processors together, and it was called Taligent. And they were very successful. And probably a couple of the really greatest examples of co-branding. And I've talked about this before, when Pepsi gave up in fighting the cola wars with Coke, Pepsi started turning around and buying fast food places. They bought Pizza Hut, they bought KFC, they bought Taco Bell, they bought A&W, and I'm trying to remember who else they bought. I can't remember. They started creating these fusion stores where Pizza Hut and KFC were together at the same time, and they ultimately became wildly successful, so much so that Pepsi actually split them off and created them as a separate corporation. Another example, and it seems silly that they would have to go to this, but when Doritos and Taco Bell would finally get together and they would make their flavored Dorito chips, it seems natural, but in one way or another, it takes somebody to come up with a brilliant idea. So the last form of branding is what's known as ingredient branding. And this is where you create brands together that are combined with other brand products. And sometimes they are not obvious. They can be one small part of a larger brand. And so Westin Hotels started what they call their heavenly beds. And these are beds, in essence, that are conglomerates of pillows and high count pillowcases, and also beds as well. And so they combine these together. Another brilliant example of ingredient branding is Intel. And so Intel from 1988 to 1992 had several big rivals. They still have a couple of them. They had Citrix, who was building a high-speed processor similar to the Intel's. They had AMD, who's still a competitor of them. But what they wanted to do was try to get consumers to identify with the Intel Inside. And so they created the Intel Inside logo that they put on PCs. And ironically, it seems ironic, but Intel started creating commercials where all they did was the jingle, ding, 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 ding. And you mentally, fill that in your own mind, is that it meant Intel Inside. It was a wildly successful kind of thing that they came up with. And so the last thing that many times we forget is packaging is also advertisement. Packaging many times gets I would say, kind of a short shrift, because we don't think of it as anything other than a container for the product itself. And so the activities that are designed in producing the package itself, all of those things come together to create a unique brand. And so believe me, if you come out of a store like Tiffany, you can rest assured that people want to be seen carrying that bag out, all right? It's not a surprise that Victoria's Secret's bags were made in the way that they were because they were meant to attract attention. So, what are the reasons why? Well, one of them is, as I said, is they serve as a marketing tool. They are ways to help consumers pick out their items easily. They promote the brand image. And packaging can also bring out huge benefits to producers. They make it easier for consumers to be able to find their products on the shelves. They identify the brand, especially with colors. They help to assist you to store goods at home. So one of the greater examples of packaging was when they started to put 12-ounce Cokes in boxes that you could easily fit in a refrigerator. Great example. And then also ways that make it easier to consume the product. And for the life of me, we're in the 21st century, and why can't they create a self-sealing bag for breakfast cereal? I have no idea. They're still using the wax paper that they used in the 1930s. And if you're like my kids, their first reaction is to rip the bag open and to spill it over half of the kitchen. Not that I'm complaining. Okay, we have hit the end of chapter 13 of Setting Strategy. I will shoot you an email tomorrow afternoon to let you know when I'm finished. And without further ado, I hope you have a good night. And next week when we come back, we'll start talking about the cases, and we'll talk about how we want to go through the case presentations. So until then, everybody have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, guys.